This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Hosted by Katie Milkman, an award-winning behavioral scientist and author of the best-selling book, How to Change, Choiceology is a show about the psychology and economics behind our decisions. Hear true stories from Nobel laureates, authors, athletes, and everyday people about why we do the things we do. Listen to Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Hello and welcome to The Law According to Trump from Amicus. This is Slate's podcast about the courts and the law. I'm Andrea Bernstein, sitting in for Dahlia Lithwick while she's on a well-deserved break. In this series, we're taking a look at how Donald Trump deploys the law, how he's used lawyers and lawsuits, and sometimes even judges to enhance his brand, his money, and his power. Today on the show, we're going to talk not about Trump precisely, but about some of the attorneys who represent him. In last week's episode, we looked at Trump's legal playbook, how he sues all kinds of people all the time, and how he uses the law as a political branding tool, taking these legal moonshots that seem bananas, yet somehow make bananas the law of the land. Like last month's big immunity decision in the Supreme Court. Our guest last week, Jim Zirin, spoke about the original author of that playbook, Roy Cohen, Senator Joe McCarthy's lawyer turned Donald Trump's gold standard of a lawyer. Until he wasn't. In the early 1980s, Cohen, who was closeted and gay, was dying of AIDS. Trump stopped giving him business. Cohen's boyfriend was also dying and needed a place to stay, and Trump gave him one at one of his hotels, the Barbizon Plaza. But then, Trump started sending him bills for the room. Donald Trump pisses ice water, Roy Cohen said. Not long after that, Cohen died. Trump stood in the back at Cohen's memorial. He didn't speak. And that's the template. From very early days in his business, litigation was central to Trump's business model. And to make that work, Trump paid his lawyers as little as he could. He gave them 30 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar, or called them up and said, "You should be paying me. It's so good for you to have me as a client." And then in the perpetual campaign of his presidency and post-presidency, Trump found a new way to not pay. Thanks to the political groups supporting him, often raising money from small donors to pay Trump's legal bills. But it isn't just the money. It's the legal trouble lawyers get into working for Trump.
President Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, is going to jail. Cohen has just been sentenced in a New York City courtroom on multiple charges, including his role in paying hush money during the 2016 election to two women alleged to have had affairs with Trump. Payments prosecutors say were coordinated with and directed by Donald Trump himself. Let's go right to our Justice Department.
By February of 2019, Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, had already pleaded guilty and been sentenced to 3 years in prison for, among other things, violating federal campaign finance laws at the direction of Donald Trump. Cohen testified to Congress before reporting to Otisville Prison and described how it had come to that. Trump would ask him to cross a line. If Cohen would do it, Trump would push him to cross another one. And the more willing Cohen was to break rules on Trump's behalf, the more trust Trump placed in him. But also, the more Trump had on him, the more Cohen was locked in. In 2023 and 2024, more Trump attorneys faced the other side of the law.
John Eastman pled not guilty to charges of conspiracy, fraud.
Donald Trump's former attorney, Sidney Powell, just pleaded guilty in a deal with prosecutors.
Rudy Giuliani is the latest in a wave of defendants who have pleaded not guilty and waived
I am so delighted that to help us understand the what and the why of lawyering for Trump, I'm joined by someone who's had a front row seat literally to all of this. Danya Perry represents Michael Cohen. She's the founding partner of Perry Law in New York City, a graduate of Harvard and Yale law schools, and has served as Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and as Deputy Attorney General for the State of New York, and Chief of Investigations for the Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption. She also teaches at New York University Law School. Danya, thank you so much for joining us on Amicus.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Let's just start with your experience. How did you first get connected with Michael Cohen?
We were first connected right after I'd started my little law firm. It was not too long after COVID hit. I met his wife through mutual friends, and it was right after Michael Cohen had been remanded to prison after he had refused to sign a guarantee that he would not publish his tell-all book about the former president. For failing to do that, which the Bureau of Prisons had said would be a condition of his release, he was put in shackles and handcuffs and thrown into solitary confinement. And Laura Cohen reached out to me. She said, "Hey, can you take this case? We got to find some way to get him out." So I took the case. It was, I took a heavy discount on it because I saw it as a loss leader, but more importantly, I saw it as an important constitutional case. So that was how I first came into the world of Michael Cohen.
So this came up in his testimony, the sequence of events regarding his book publication, but I think it's one of the lesser known Michael Cohen stories. So before we go on to the Attorney General's civil suit, just give us the sort of backstory. So he's in prison. He's serving his sentence after having pleaded guilty to, among other things, campaign finance violations at the direction of Donald Trump. And then he gets a COVID release, right?
Correct.
And then what happens?
So he got a COVID release, as many, many federal prisoners did. And because he had significant comorbidities, well-documented medical records, he had been released. And the release was being converted into home confinement. And so for that, he had to go visit with the parole officer in the Southern District of New York. And they were going to tell him his conditions of release and make sure that his supervision was in place. Very, very standard stuff. So he went down to the federal courthouse, and the parole officer read to him very standard conditions of release. But then there was a new one that had been tailor-made for Michael Cohen, was never seen before or since, and with good reason, because it's, as Judge Hellerstein found, unconstitutional. It said that there was going to be a complete bar on him doing any kind of media, really speaking at all about his experiences. And it's called a prior restraint in First Amendment law. And Michael had the wherewithal, the presence of mind to realize that this didn't seem right, even though he's not a constitutional lawyer, he's not a criminal lawyer. It did not have the hallmarks of, a standard conditions. And so he questioned it and he pushed back. He didn't say no, but he asked some questions, and he was put in the other room. And about an hour later, federal marshals came in with the shackles and the handcuffs, and they threw him back, and they threw him in solitary. It was highly unusual stuff. And we were pretty quickly able to convince the court that it was, in fact, an unconstitutional prior restraint on speech. And so the judge so found and let him out immediately.
Did you, the sort of implication that this is kind of dripping with is that somehow someone higher up in the Justice Department or the Bureau of Prisons or the White House, wanted this to happen. Do you have any evidence of that? I mean, how did this come about? Do you know?
We don't know. Michael filed a lawsuit trying to get those answers. He's also has filed several FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, to try and get documentation. He's been stymied at every turn. We got maybe 70 pages and does not go to the point. And so he has not yet gotten the actual proof. The judge obviously found it was retaliatory and unconstitutional, and that was a finding against Barr and the head of the Bureau of Prisons. But no, all we can do is make inferences. I mean, look, I'm the farthest thing from a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a political person. I'm just a lawyer. The only other time in my entire career, which is now, I guess, 27 years long, and I've been in and around the justice system my entire life, the federal justice system and the Department of Justice, never seen anything like it other than when I represented Michael Avenatti in his first case. All I can do is point to these little breadcrumbs, these little data points, and say how unusual that they are, and wonder, that doesn't happen without someone very high up making the call. And for what reason, we can only speculate.
All right, let's talk just briefly, because you mentioned that after representing him with this, regarding the First Amendment issue and the solitary confinement, that you represented him in the Attorney General's civil case. So let's maybe just briefly, you could explain what that was about.
Sure. So Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, brought a civil case against Trump, the Trump organization, Trump's grown children. It was just essentially for fraud, for having a pattern of fraudulent financial statements. Some of them less meaningful, including, trying to get on the Forbes, 100 list and trying to make people think he was, wealthier than he was. But some of them for more malevolent purposes, including providing them to lenders and insurance companies to try and get better deal terms from them. And so they brought this lawsuit against him after a years-long investigation. And it was tried last year, and Michael Cohen was a key witness there. I was brought in just shortly before the trial because the Attorney General there, for whatever reasons that are known only to them, did not prep him at all, did not provide documents to him at all. At the trial, they barely, registered objections. They barely redirected. And so he believed that he needed some support. And so I came in shortly before the trial and, helped him get through his testimony the best we could under those pretty difficult circumstances.
And then, of course, you represented him during the criminal trial, what people call the hush money trial. It's not really a hush money trial. It's about election interference, really, but that's how people know it.
Correct. That one was night and day from the Attorney General trial in the sense that he was very well prepared. We had all the documents, we had all the exhibits, I had countless hours working with the DA's office, and it was a lengthy and pretty grueling process for him, but at the end of the day, quite vindicating and validating. I had one more, by the way. Just after Michael had testified in the grand jury and he had been indicted, Trump brought a $500 million lawsuit against Michael in federal district court in Florida. So we were able to defend that and go on offense. And the day before, one business day before I was supposed to depose Trump, he voluntarily dismissed it. So I'm going to count that in the W column.
So in these instances where you represented him, the First Amendment case, the civil case, the criminal case, what did you come to understand drew Michael Cohen to Donald Trump?
Trump kind of famously is attracted to people around him who are yes men and women, right? He enjoys a cult of personality, and he doesn't care for pushback or for feedback or kicking the tires or looking under the hood, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's generally his way or the highway. And it's really no different with his lawyers. And Michael has said this many times, that he believes he was in a cult. And that there is some, that Trump is the charismatic leader and that people really find that appealing. He is a strong man and he plays that politically as well. But in his business dealings, that's what it was. And that the people around him lived for his approval, and dreaded, of course, his disapproval. And, Michael, he's a strong personality himself. He, has had some business success himself. He kind of revered Trump. He has read, before he started working for Trump, he had read The Art of the Deal many times, including, I think, from high school on. And so he really was drawn to, kind of the celebrity and the lights and the power. And, once he came on board, he kind of fell into that and was pulled in. And, that is the kind of lawyer that Trump has attracted, since the Roy Cohn days.
And Trump understands his effect on people, that he is deploying that they love him and want to please him and don't want to cross him.
Very much so. And he has enough lawyers and others who will do it that he can, get rid of the people who don't fall into lockstep. He kind of famously in 2017, he directed his White House counsel to pressure his then Attorney General Sessions to not to recuse himself from overseeing the Russia probe. And when Don McGahn, who was the counsel at the time, didn't do that, and Sessions ended up appointing special counsel Mueller, Trump went bananas and he said, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" Right, Roy Cohn, who famously, had been a legal aid to McCarthy back in the day, and then went on to be Trump's personal lawyers and was later disbarred, right, for severely unethical and unprofessional conduct. That is the mold of the Trump lawyer, and Michael Cohen filled that mold. He was in that mold, and he did that, from 2006 to 2018, when he was indicted.
Cohen was called Trump's personal attorney, but a lot of what he did wasn't really lawyering, right?
Right. Just as Roy Cohn was a fixer, that's how Michael kind of styled himself. A lot of the work, and I looked at this very closely because Trump's, $500 million lawsuit was that, Michael had breached various fiduciary duties that he owed him as a lawyer. But no, a lot of the work that Michael did for him was, can't even really call it business stuff. It is consigliere stuff. Definitely not legal, and some of it not lawful, right? Which is why crime fraud exception has applied to Michael and to so many of Trump's lawyers. It's extra legal. It's outside of, of the law, literally.
There was a theory that emerged not long after Cohen's home and office were searched by the FBI, which was that calling him an attorney, so Trump was president then President Trump called him his personal attorney, which meant that all of their interactions could be cloaked in privilege and thus immune from the prying eyes of investigators. Was that, in fact, what happened, as you understand it?
Well, I think that was the purpose. I think that is why Trump has surrounded himself with so many lawyers. And I think he now sees that hasn't served him particularly well.
That was the plan, that they were going to, like, from the get-go. Was that, I guess my question is, was that intentional? Certainly was the effect. But is that something that Trump did on purpose, to sort of bring in somebody like a Michael Cohen, call him an attorney, and then, force the FBI and prosecutors to have, privilege teams to review all their communications and so forth and so on?
Yes, I think so. And look, I will just say, that's not so unusual. You see that in corporate America all the time, where the general counsel will be CC'd, on a purely business email, and that doesn't, always shield it. But yes, that was absolutely being contemplated, in terms of, let's bring in these lawyers, and then no one can invade a privilege that we have.
After the break, More with Danya Perry.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Choiceology is a show all about the psychology and economics behind our decisions. Each episode shares the latest research in behavioral science and dives into themes like, can we learn to make smarter decisions, and the power of do-overs. The show is hosted by Katie Milkman. She's an award-winning behavioral scientist, professor at the Wharton School, and author of the best-selling book, How to Change. In each episode, Katie talks to authors, historians, athletes, Nobel laureates, and everyday people about why we make irrational choices and how we can make better ones to avoid costly mistakes. Listen and subscribe at schwab.com/podcast or find it wherever you listen.
We return now to our conversation with Danya Perry. I'm wondering, during the course of representing Cohen, I mean, you've mentioned that obviously, a lot of this stuff has been in the sort of public domain. But I'm wondering what you learned about Trump as a person and as a litigant, and about the way he uses the law that was new to you while representing Cohen.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've seen it now through a couple of different vantage points, right? And there are a couple types of lawyer that seem to be attracted to him. And I've kind of seen them all. There's those who are willing to engage with him and doing his bidding and getting themselves into legal and ethical, predicaments, right? So many have been disbarred, many have been sanctioned, some have been indicted. So there's that, but then there is kind of the other end of the spectrum. And I certainly saw that in the criminal case, more kind of, for lack of a better term, respectable lawyer, some of whom I've known and worked with in the past, who actually are not ideologues, but they're kind of true believers in the system of justice, and they think everyone deserves good counsel, and if someone's willing to pay them, they'll kind of take it on board, and maybe they think actually it'll be good for their careers. I think counterfactually, given that most Trump representations don't end particularly well.
So I do want to, sort of expand the aperture in just one second, but I just want to ask you about something that I learned during the hush money trial. And, I started writing about Michael Cohen even before his home was searched, and, have followed much of his legal travails. But it was news to me during the trial that one of the things that spurred the whole reimbursement scheme, which underlay the 34 charges of falsifying business records, stemmed from a steep cut in Cohen's bonus at the end of 2016. So this is after Cohen had arranged the Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels hush money payments. After all of that, Trump's won the campaign, and then Cohen gets a steep cut in his bonus. I'm wondering if you could pull back the curtain on what happened there.
I mean, that was just bananas, right? And that kind of does give you a little bit of a window into the psyche here. What Michael has said is that he doesn't quite understand either, because I asked the exact same question, like that's just so not pragmatic, right? Someone essentially has something over you, and you're gonna stiff them. I mean, forget loyalty, right? Forget, you did this for me, let me do this for you. It just kind of made no sense. But in the Trump mindset, he didn't need Michael anymore, right? He was going on to the presidency. And so he's going to kind of stiff everyone on the way out the door. And it wasn't just Michael, right? And so it did make sense. And Michael had to kick and scream and not so much threaten, but remind people that, he was in a position where he had inside information, for lack of a better term. And so that's when they cut this deal to repay him.
To be clear, that deal was the reimbursement scheme. That was at the heart of the case, which was that Cohen would get his $130,000 back, grossed up, plus another $50,000 that he'd laid out for a poll, and all of that with extra money to take care of taxes, paid out over the course of a year, and being called a so-called legal retainer when there was no legal work done. So, for those who are listening, each of those payments constituted the falsifying business records that was the result of the felony, the finding of guilt on all 34 of those counts by Donald Trump. So I did want to expand the aperture. And, it's interesting because, the day that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty in federal court in Manhattan, a jury also found Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, guilty of tax fraud. And, others in Trump's orbits that have been found guilty of various things. Roger Stone is his campaign advisor, Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor. Of course, there are all of the people who were charged in connection with the January 6th attack, which many judges in Washington have pointed out they did on behalf of Trump. But it took a while for the lawyers to get in trouble until it didn't. So by my count, those who have been indicted, at least, include Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Boris Epshteyn, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Kenneth Chesborough. We're not counting people like Jeffrey Clark, who almost became Attorney General in January 2021. He was facing a disciplinary ruling. But I'm wondering sort of what was the delay in it sort of coming to the lawyers?
Look, I think there's a reticence to go after lawyers. I think there is a presumption that they understand that they're bound by ethics rules and by the law, of course, that they're sworn to uphold. And so I think there's a natural reticence, but I also think, right, because we see even in some cases where they're unnamed co-conspirators, they're not indicted, including in Jack Smith's case. I think there's that, but more than that, it does, as we discussed earlier, it does take some time and some litigation to pierce the privilege. And so in some cases, judges have had to make findings that it's more likely than not that the lawyer, was a part of a conspiracy or aided and abetted or was used in furtherance of a conspiracy. So sometimes there's that. And sometimes, so I just think it can take a little longer to unwind a case or to bring a case against a lawyer. When I was the deputy chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York, if you're going after a lawyer, you had several layers within Maine Justice, the Maine Department of Justice, that you had to get through in order to indict them, in order to do search warrants. So there's just an extra layer, I think, of concern that if you go after a lawyer, then you're going to have to deal with privilege issues and some thorny issues. So you better be damn sure that there is a there.
So I want to talk about some of those cases, and maybe we'll start with Jenna Ellis, who is really, a non-famous, I would argue, Trump lawyer. She was a legal advisor to Trump, but also a spokesperson during the 2020 campaign. And I wanted to just sort of play a little bit of tape of what she sounded like in the summer of 2020. Here she is speaking on Trump's campaign podcast.
The Democrats know that they can't win fair and square. So they are wanting to manipulate the rules at every single turn. They're wanting to manipulate our election system to try to impose a nationwide mail-in voting. They're trying to impose ballot harvesting and all of these ways that are ripe for fraud so that they can overturn elections in America. We've seen this.
That was Jenna Ellis in 2020. And then in the wake of the 2020 election, she was involved in assembling fake electors for Trump. She was indicted for racketeering in Georgia and pleaded guilty in October of 2023 to aiding and abetting false statements and writings.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to address the court. As an attorney who is also a Christian, I take my responsibilities as a lawyer very seriously, and I endeavor to be a person of sound moral and ethical character in all of my dealings. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse.
So that was sort of the two halves of Jenna Ellis when she was on Team Trump and then when she was not. What can you tell us about Jenna Ellis and her case? And I'm wondering if it's sort of emblematic of a series of legal cases from after the 2020 election.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a couple of molds here. I mean, she pled guilty. Obviously, there are others. Yeah, she had been a deputy DA in Colorado, although she styled herself as a constitutional lawyer. That was not really accurate. I think she rose to prominence on Team Trump pretty precipitously, and then I think fell from grace also pretty precipitously, and pled guilty to the felony count and is now cooperating in that Georgia case if that ever goes to trial.
And she just agreed to cooperate in the Arizona fake electors case.
There's certainly quite a few others who have been indicted in various courts. There's Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, and of course, federal cases. And, who started out all in, with that kind of fiery rhetoric. And then, obviously had some footfalls, for lack of a better term, and, have come out the other way, accepted responsibility and shown some contrition.
John Eastman, who you sort of obliquely mentioned, he was the one who the judge in the 9th District found was, what was it? A coup in search of a legal theory. And that they more likely, Eastman and Trump had more likely than not conspired to break the law, causing his records to be released to the House committee. Giuliani is also under indictment, obviously in Georgia and in Arizona. Those two, Eastman, Giuliani, I would argue sort of are more in the kind of, not repentant, not sorry, not full of remorse. At least, we haven't heard anything to indicate that at this point.
I think that's right. I think there are certainly those who are hoping that Trump wins a second term. They get pardoned and perhaps elevated to, high positions within the Department of Justice, for sure, even though they've been disbarred or recommended for disbarment.
It's not just being indicted that is a problem. I mean, it's also, you referred to this disbarment or like Jeffrey Clark, who the would-be acting attorney general, who in January 2021 prepared a letter to the Georgia legislature about stopping their certification. He's facing disciplinary proceedings. And this is really serious, right? That you are disbarred or disciplined. I mean, you've worked hard to become a lawyer, and then that.
It's really hard, and courts are loath to disbar. I mean, that is the ultimate sanction. There are other actions, that courts can take, but so many of these lawyers now have been disbarred or are recommended for disbarment. I mean, it's a lengthy process that can go, up and down the appellate circuits. But so far, Giuliani has been suspended in New York. And in DC, the Board of Professional Responsibility has recommended his disbarment. Clark was recently recommended for disbarment. in the District of Columbia. Eastman, after I think a 35-day trial, was recommended for disbarment. Ellis, who we just talked about, was censured by the Colorado bar. Sidney Powell has disciplinary proceedings against her, which I believe were dismissed, but are now on appeal, I believe. So yeah, there's that, and there's sanctions. Many lawyers, including Alina Habba and others, have been sanctioned, and financial penalties assessed against them. But just that ignominy of having been censured or sanctioned by a court is like the worst thing that can happen to you. I mean, I guess not. I guess indictment, or I guess there are worse things. But as a lawyer, it's a horrible embarrassment, and of course makes it difficult to get new clients. But I think there's just a different calculus.
One of the things that, as you were going through that litany of names, right? These are lawyers that I've covered, many of them I've watched in the courtroom. And it is so striking to me that there just seems to be, so many of them willing to do it, even having seen what's happened to their predecessors. And, we've touched on this, but why do it when you see what's happened to so many of your colleagues?
It's hard for me to answer because that would require me to get into their brains. I mean, I, would never contemplate any, getting close to anything like this. And not just because I teach professional responsibility, but I take my oath seriously. I mean, here we have it's interesting. Trump kind of knows how to pick his lawyers, and they know how to pick him. All of the prominent lawyers that I'm really aware of, or that are kind of in this, in the arena here, are all solo practitioners. They're very small firms. And I think there's something to that, not because, if you're a solo practitioner, you're going to be unethical. Of course not. I have a small firm, little litigation boutique myself. I think there's something about being in a big firm and being checked. Obviously large firms have general counsel's offices, but you're also, surrounded by other lawyers who will challenge you, on substance, on process, on ethics. So it's a kind of peer pressure, right, that keeps lawyers attentive to ethics issues. Sometimes lawyers, particularly some in small firms where don't have institutional clients, they'll take risks for financial reasons. Here, I mean, we've heard repeatedly that Trump doesn't pay his lawyers. So, you could get a large upfront retainer, sure, but, at some point those end, right? You use them up, with your billable hours. And so I don't, it's not generally financial pressure. It's not fame and glory, because these lawyers typically are not bathed in glory. So, it's not always ideological, because some of these guys are not true, MAGA believers. So it's got to be some combination of, I think I can do this, and I'm going to be the one who, kind of falls outside the mold. And, look, and some of them have had some wins, right?
I want to circle back to Michael Cohen and sort of wrap things up there. But I did want to just ask you a couple of things, because you mentioned the crime fraud exemption, right?
It's both. It's both. It's an exemption. It's an exception
the crime fraud
to
exemption.
The privilege.
So can you just explain what that is?
Sure. It was a common law doctrine that has been codified by rules of evidence. For millennia, there has been in our kind of system of justice, brought over from the British system, there is a privilege between an attorney and her client, which is generally sacrosanct, which means that law enforcement or counterparty cannot pierce it. So cannot generally gain access through discovery or any other means to those communications between a client and attorney. But there is this exception, that's the crime fraud exception, which does not allow this kind of veil of secrecy between lawyer and client, where the communications, the purpose for the communication is to seek advice for committing a crime or a fraud. And so that has to be litigated, and a court has to make a finding that, in fact, that was the purpose for this communication. And if the judge so finds by a preponderance of the evidence, which is just more likely than not that that was the purpose for the communication, if the judge so finds, then that communication is no longer secret, is no longer private, and can be turned over to the other side or to the government, and can be used against that client. So it's hard to break that seal, but it certainly can be done, and we've seen it done in practice and in quite a few cases that Trump has been involved in.
I'm wondering if this is this an area where the fact that it's come up so much is going to change law or lawyering going forward, do you think?
I don't know about law. The law has been in place for a long time, and it's a rule of evidence. There would have to be a whole process around it, or processes in various states. Hopefully practice, though, right? I mean, and hopefully for the better, meaning not that people figure out how to build a better mousetrap, how to avoid disclosure, but that lawyers understand that this is not okay. That simply because someone is asking you, how to do something that is not kosher, that it's not okay. You're seeing lawyers being sanctioned, being indicted, being disbarred. That hopefully is a sign for people to pay closer attention and make sure that they're not being used for evil. And hopefully it just raises some more awareness with these very high-profile cases.
After the break, more with Danya Perry. This episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. Pre-alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut, where you need it most. Go to zbiotics.com/amicus to get 15% off your first order when you use Amicus at checkout. Pre-alcohol is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/amicus and use the code AMICUS at checkout for 15% off.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
We return now to our conversation with Danya Perry. I just wanted to circle back to where we started with Michael Cohen, because I think his arc and his story is interesting in terms of how unique it is. So let's play a couple of selections of tape of Cohen before and after he pleaded guilty. We're going to start with 2 clips from around the time of the 2016 campaign.
And I will do anything to protect Mr. Trump, the family, now Vice President-elect Pence, as well as the campaign. Fortunately, Mr. Trump has a significant number of people. I'd like to keep myself in that little circle of extremely loyal people.
He does.
And we will do what it's necessary to protect him and the office of the presidency.
I'm warning you. Tread very lightly, because what I'm going to do to you is going to be disgusting. Do you understand me? Don't think you're going to hide behind your pen, because it's not going to happen. I'm more than happy to discuss it with your attorney and with your legal counsel, because you're going to need it.
So that was a tape of Cohen speaking to then Daily Beast reporter Tim Mack about a story that he didn't want him to publish about Ivana Trump. Here's Cohen testifying to Congress in 2019.
I regret the day I said yes to Mr. Trump. I regret all the help and support I gave him along the way. I am ashamed of my own failings and publicly accepted responsibility for them by pleading guilty in the Southern District of New York. I am ashamed of my weakness and my misplaced loyalty, of the things I did for Mr. Trump in an effort to protect and promote him. I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is.
So I'm wondering, Danya Perry, if you can reflect on the arc of all this. What happened between those clips?
Michael sometimes refers to it in almost biblical terms or Shakespearean. You know, he had this blind devotion, allegiance, loyalty to Trump, and then was betrayed by Trump. Yes, and had a choice. You know, he talks about this inflection point where he had a choice, and this came out very vividly in the trial. Trump had basically sent a lawyer in to represent Michael, who was acting in Trump's interests and not in Michael's. He wanted Michael to toe the line, right? To hold fast and take the bullet that Michael, and you heard in that earlier clip, had said he would take for Trump, metaphorically. And Michael had, you know, a real come to Jesus, you know, with himself, with his family, and decided that he wasn't going to put, you know, his family in harm's way. He wasn't going to sacrifice his loyalty to them and to the country. He really saw it in those terms, in favor of his loyalty to Trump. And so he turned, right? He flipped. And ever since he's been doing penance, right? The name of his podcast is Mea Culpa. He has accepted responsibility, and he now sees it, you know, in very stark terms, you know, for what he says it always was, which was just, you know, Trump in his characterization never has loyalty to anyone other than himself. Never did. He believed that's the name of his book, is one of Michael's books, is Disloyal. And what he's talking about is Trump, that Trump has no loyalty to anyone other than himself and his own interests. And that Michael, you know, sees that very, very clearly now. And so you played that little clip of Jenna Ellis, the before and after too. I think a lot of people, you know, there are people that were in Trump's administration who were then, you know, kind of parted ways with him, many of them over January 6th, and who then were thrown under the bus. And so there are quite a few examples of it now, but none, I think, sharper than the experience Cohen had. And so now he's kind of made it his life's work to, you know, I said in the beginning, you know, scream from the rafters or rooftops, whatever it is, you know, that what this man is capable of. So that's the arc, I think, and I have every reason to believe that it is heartfelt, and that he means every word of it. That is you know, a full turn, and you know, it just learned. It was a hard lesson, I guess. I'll leave it at that.
Danya Perry, so great to talk to you about all of this. I didn't think there was more to learn, and I learned so much. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Amicus. Thanks so much for listening. And thank you to our Slate Plus members who support all the work we do here on Amicus and at Slate. Slate Plus members have access to dozens of exclusive episodes with Dahlia Lithwick, including unparalleled analysis of the major decisions of this past Supreme Court term with Slate's other legal heavyweight, Mark Joseph Stern. And you can listen to deep dive interviews in the extraordinary How Originalism Ate the Law series. If If you want to check it out and you're not a Slate Plus member, you can get access by simply clicking Try Free at the top of our show page if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, or by going to slate.com/Amicus Plus. Sarah Birmingham is Amicus's senior producer. Our producer is Patrick Fort. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio at Slate. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor. And Ben Richmond is our senior director of operations. I'm Andrea Bernstein, in for Dahlia Lithwick. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Until then, hang in there.
Did I hear you're shopping for a car? Because I've been at it for ages. Ugh, such a time suck, right?
Not really. I bought it on Carvana. Super convenient.
Oh, then comes all the financing, research. Am I right?
Well, you can, but I got pre-qualified for a Carvana auto loan in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, but then all the number crunching and terms, right?
Nope. I saw real numbers as I shopped, found my dream car, and got it in a couple of days.
Wait, like you already have it?
Yep.
Oh.
Go to Carvana.com to finance your car the convenient way.